Hello, friends, and welcome to We Keep Us Safe, Prison Abolition and Transformative Justice. This is the third panel in a series that Reclaim Pride Coalition and the Bureau of General Services Queer Division have put together, leading up to the Queer Liberation March on June 27th. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder with my partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. And we're a queer bookstore and event space in New York City. We have been around since 2012. We've been hosted by the LGBT Community Center since 2014, and that's where we remain. So we're currently closed due to this lovely pandemic, but we will open again someday. So stay with us. And we've been doing tons of events with RPC and on our own, so please check out our website and you can see what's coming up. I'll say a few words about RPC and then we'll get started. So Reclaim Pride Coalition, RPC, is a New York City-based group of LGBTQIA2S+ activists in alliance with grassroots community groups nationally and internationally. RPC's primary work is organizing the Queer Liberation March, an annual people's protest march without corporate funding, corporate floats, politicians grandstanding, or police involvement. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to pass this over to Chidi, who is our moderator from RPC, and I'll be back at the end to say farewell. So let's get started.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for joining us at our panel today. We Keep Us Safe, Prison Abolition and Transformative Justice. We'd like to begin just everybody introducing ourselves and let you know who we are. So again, hi, I'm Chidi Adeyemi. I'm going to be your moderator today and how you say them pronouns. I am a part of RPC and as was said, we do the annual Queer Liberation March where we make sure to have no regimented contingencies, no corporate sponsors, and no NYPD marching or have any control over decision making. Matthew, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Matthew. I use they, he pronouns. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I'm with the Richmond Community Bail Fund, which is a community-run, grassroots, all volunteer-run nonprofit in Richmond, Virginia that's been around since 2017 that I helped start. And what we do is we post cash bail for absolutely anybody who needs it. We don't discriminate based on charge type or any other information. If we can afford the bail, we can post it. And then also more broadly, sort of in our political work, we work towards the abolition of not just cash bail, but also pretrial detention, also incarceration, also the social order that incarceration represents, which we'll, I'm sure, get into later. Yeah, I'm super excited for the panel today. I'm huge fans of the other folks on the call. And I will pass it over to Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Love, pronouns she, hers. I am the foundress of the Gen Love Project. The Gen Love Project provides welcome home packages to recently released and soon to be released LGBTQ+ people coming home from prisons and jails. I am the co-chair of the formerly incarcerated subgroup to the National LGBT and HIV Criminal Justice Working Group. And I also do some work with the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And I will pass it to Naomi.
Thank you. Let me adjust my mic. My name is Nomi. I am here on Powhatan land, or so-called Richmond, Virginia. I'm the co-host of the radio show and podcast Race Capital, which interrogates racial narratives in the former capital of the Confederacy. I'm also a part of Virginia Student Power Network, which fights for making sure that students are protected, and especially that marginalized students are able to speak their truth on their campuses and fight for an education that is informed by their values. And I also do work with the Richmond Community Bail Fund. And I will pass it to Vicky.
Hi, I'm Vicky, she, her, Vicky Osterweil. I am a writer and agitator. I'm based in Philadelphia. I recently wrote a book last year that came out last year called In Defense of Looting, which argues that the abolition of property and whiteness will be necessary to join the abolition of police and prisons through a history looking at those processes from the abolition of slavery to the present. In terms of activist work, I do a lot of stuff. One of the things that I'm doing right now is working with Philadelphia Housing Action, which was involved in the camps over the summer and has been helping to house homeless, unhoused folks in Philadelphia, and also a variety of abolitionist projects that are fun to participate in. So I'll give it back to Lydia for the last one.
This is Lydia. They, them pronouns. I'm a youngish East Asian person with short black hair and glasses, wearing a blue shirt in front of a credenza with a lot of books, pictures, and random cups on it. I am joining you from occupied, unceded Piscataway lands, the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. I am the founder of the Fund for Community Reparations for Autistic People of Color's Interdependence, Survival, and Empowerment. We practice a joint politic of mutual aid and redistributive justice. That is, we come from and represent the community members that our organization supports, and we believe in returning resources that have been stolen from, deprived, extracted, and exploited from our communities back to our communities. Outside of that work, I'm also an educator, adjunct faculty. I lead workshops and facilitation. I'm a cultural worker, and I'm also a policy lawyer, which is the funnest, weirdest thing to add, because doing law of any kind creates often inherent tensions of doing community organizing work, particularly in the service of abolition and liberation.
Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. So as we start off, I think I want to ask all of you, like, what does abolition work mean? Like, what does your abolition work mean to you? I feel like the word abolition being an abolitionist can get thrown around a bit, and I would love to really just like chat about your experiences with this and what you strive to do.
I can field that for a second. Like, I think one thing that, I don't want to like overframe it or anything, but I think one thing that's happened recently as abolition has become a real mainstream term that people have been really comfortable with, it's been in the Times, thanks to, people, incredible activists like Mariam Kaba. I think a lot of people feel this impulse to argue that, abolition, like, it's different. We're talking about police abolition, we're talking about defund. It's different from the abolitionist movement. In the 19th century, that was different. And like, I think for me, one thing that's
always guided the way I think about police and prison abolition is that in the 19th and 18th century in America, slavery was just as normal as police and prisons are now. And so it's only in hindsight, thanks to the incredible general strike of the enslaved that took down the Confederacy and destroyed the plantation economy, and almost led to liberation for Black folks in America. Thanks to that movement, we can now recognize the evil that slavery was. But up until that movement, it was not clear to a lot of people who would later go on to say, of course it was good. Ditto Jim Crow. So I think for me, one thing that abolition really means, I guess I'm being very theoretical here as a personal, but abolition really means connecting to no, we really don't even understand how violent and horrible this thing is, because it's been so naturalized, the police have been so naturalized, and the prison system has been so naturalized that we can't even really see it in any sort of moral or ethical clarity, I think. So that is a very theoretical rather than personal answer. But I guess also I really hate the police personally. I think they're horrible. Prisons make me incredibly sad. I hate every second that anyone is in a cage. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll go. What does abolition and abolitionists mean to me? I'll be honest, as a Black trans woman, I knew of abolitionists from history, and watching so many of my forefathers and reading about their plight and everything else. So when I had started on this journey to realize that there is more that I have to give to the community and the earth, and start this journey of fight for the voiceless to end modern day slavery, when I was first coined as an abolitionist, it made me slightly uncomfortable, well, very uncomfortable. I didn't think that I earned the right to be called an abolitionist yet. I don't know if I will ever actually earn, no matter how much work I do. As Vicky stated, that often, especially currently, often this is a word that so many people are coining themselves as, and the word is just thrown around so freely, so loosely, without ever actually doing the footwork. Because when this word was created for those people of olden day, they fought like heck. They lost their lives. They gave up everything. They were completely selflessness for the cause. And for me to feel comfortable with knowing and feeling this, for me to call myself an abolitionist, I have to get to the point of complete selflessness. And I think a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people want the word for the notoriety. Because when you hear, oh, he or she or they are abolitionists, people want to pay attention a little bit. And it's often about self. And it's not doing, it's not fighting the fight. These people who, I don't want to point names, but a lot of people, they're not fighting the fight. I don't need to be coined an abolitionist to know I'm going to get out here. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to make sure my lived experiences do not happen to anyone else. And I don't need to be on a platform or sit on a soapbox to get that. And I think a lot of people right now, the current day abolitionists, is all about, oh, I'm going to have a book made after me. I'm going to sit on every single platform for every single buck. I'm going to be the queen bee or the king of the castle, because it's the in thing to be. And it's not, it is taken away from those who are truly out here fighting the fight.
And Jennifer, I know I just spoke, but I'm just going to hop really quick. I support you like so hard on that. There was a big debate that I read about when I was like researching that Frederick Douglass used to be like, why do people talk about the Underground Railroad? Like, it has to stay underground. Don't talk about the way you're moving. Don't take credit for the way you move. And this is a debate, and there was some importance to talking about it publicly. Sometimes that helped inspire enslaved people get out. But also, people never knew how Frederick Douglass escaped. He never said. And lots of people move in silence and in secrecy and in opacity, and that's incredibly valuable and important too. So thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, guys, that's all I'm saying.
This is Lydia. I echo that too, right? Like when we talk about what kinds of work we do, I've added and asked people to add to my bio this sentence that says, oftentimes the most important work that I do doesn't have a title, doesn't have a description, and doesn't have funding, and probably never will. And I also mean in that a lot of the work that I and other people in my communities and in my networks do, it's not public work. And we don't talk about it publicly, or we talk very little about it. And that can be for actual literal safety. It can be strategic. It can be for survival. And it's also because if we did just think about, like, let's just make everything we do public, every conversation we have, every campaign that we are working on, every bit of work we do to help other people in our own communities get more free, both very, very literally, out of carceral spaces of all kinds, from disability institutions to psych hospitals and jails and prisons, or metaphorically, not out of an institution, but out of abusive relationships, out of abusive communities, out of systems that are not total institutions, but are still carceral and violent and harmful. If we're talking about all of that work all the time, right, then that is doing the work to get on a pedestal. It's doing the work to get a platform. And, you know, many times we do end up in places where, because of the work we do, we might get recognition for it. And sure, can that be important? Can that be helpful? I guess it can be, if only to signal to other people in marginalized communities that yes, it is possible, for example, to be openly queer and trans and an East Asian disabled person doing work toward justice and toward liberation. But if we spend all of our time talking about here's all the things that we're doing to strategize to keep ourselves and each other safe, then that only jeopardizes the work, but it reveals that the people who are doing that aren't really necessarily in it to get the work done so much as they're in it to get attention or to get recognition for it. And unfortunately, that realization or that reality can also make it hard for us to think about what it means to be supportive of and be in solidarity with our other comrades and community members when some of us are receiving recognition. And I want to uplift recently that Vanessa Rochelle Lewis and Adrienne Marie Brown have been writing a lot about this, and particularly in response to very anti-Black accusations levied against Patrisse Cullors. Excuse me, and that it can be really difficult for us to both hold the reality, right, of how can we do the work and get the work done without seeking accolade, and also be in solidarity with and support one another when some of us might be granted some recognition and oppressive systems of white supremacy, of capitalism, of colonialism want to drive us apart, to create divisions and conflict, and to further enable conflict within our movements and our communities that will prevent us from doing the work. How can we also hold one another with care and with solidarity? And that brings me to answer this question. There's a very roundabout way to get back to it. What does abolition mean? My work is rooted and grounded in disability justice. And disability justice, which is a framework itself co-created by queer and trans disabled people, Black and brown disabled people, and queer and trans disabled people of color. Disability justice teaches us that we do not get free unless all of us are free, that we do not receive care or justice unless all of us are able to receive care and justice, unless all of us have our needs met and attended to and held with care, that all of our access becomes vital rather than an afterthought. And abolition for me means equally what we are fighting for as a vision of a world in which police and prisons become unimaginable historical artifacts, as it is how we are in relationship with one another in doing the work of liberation.
That was wonderful, Lydia. I completely agree. For me, collective liberation is at the foundation of everything I do. I mean, as Ortilod said, we don't live single issue lives, and there is so much we have to address in order to lay this groundwork.
Yeah, I heartily co-sign everything that's been said so far. And just to add a little bit, I think for me, the single quote that best sums up kind of what abolition means to me is from Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And it's that abolition only requires that we change one thing, and that's everything. Which sort of points to the fact that abolition is not just about the overthrow of police and prisons, though it is also definitely and unavoidably about those things. It's also about recognizing that police and prisons are ultimately the enforcement arm of a larger social order and a larger political order that is distinctly racial capitalist, is premised on colonialism, queerphobia, anti-transness, a whole sort of bevy of exclusionary and kind of murderous ideologies. And abolition is aimed at all of those too. And it is aimed at them by moving through policing and prisons, because all of those forces are present and are sort of maintained by policing and prisons. And I think how we understand it at the Bail Fund, specifically how we understand abolition, is something that we can actually do right now and be better off for. Not something that has to wait for some kind of mystical and long cultural transformation in order to become possible. Abolition is actually possible now, and we should be working towards it now, and we should be demanding it now. And what that means to us is we get as many people out of cages as we possibly can, regardless of what they've been charged for. Which, very intentionally we do, one, just to help as many people as possible primarily, but also to challenge the logics of the carceral state and of prisons, to sort of demonstrate that the person who has been charged with murder, they actually don't have to sit in a cage, right? We can bail them out and public safety actually won't shift. Like, it's actually, if anything, the situation now contains less violence and less suffering because the person's not being tortured in a jail. And we sort of we understand abolition sort of in the vein of the Black radical tradition as something that can be lived and actually built right now in the world that we currently sort of inhabit, and taking that commitment really seriously, sort of on every level of action. And recognizing that there can be specific lanes or specific routes from which you do abolitionist work, from which you start from, but ultimately it broadens out, and the scope is universal, almost truly, and concerned with total transformation, but not on waiting for that transformation, but on actually making it happen.
This is Lydia. That reminds me of another Ruth Wilson Gilmore quote, that abolition is a project of presence, not of absence.
Yeah, and so much has already been said, but for me, like, what is abolition to me is such a, it's a loaded question because, abolition is so much. I think of it as a transformative liberatory project, and as primarily, a militant Black feminist strategy for liberation. Just thinking about, if we understand that abolition has been an ongoing process since the first Africans were kidnapped from the coast of, continental Africa. Folks have been resisting, folks have been building ways to care for each other despite being disenfranchised by the state and institutions. There were Caribbean women who would hide out in the bushes and throw hot oil on slave catchers. This is abolitionist tactic. And so I lean into that a lot, and that leads me to also think of abolition as the true embodiment of Sankofa, which is, for folks who don't know, a word that comes out of Ghana, which means to go back and get what you forgot, or to go back and fetch it, to go back and get it. So it's about really not simply just the process of ending policing or incarceration, like Matthew was saying, but about the process of recapturing the radical imagination of our ancestors, and ultimately with the goal of building a new anti-colonial reality that is truly led by the people, for the people, and makes prisons, incarceration, disposability all obsolete.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been brought up, but there are so many intertwining things. Like, there are so many liberations we need. We need food liberation. We need people to be able to live their lives and not be threatened by the debt economy. And I feel like from a younger age, I never really thought about how all these things twist together in this certain way. And I was wondering if anybody has anything to speak about some of those.
Yeah, I think one thing that I think is really interesting, that we could really think about, I think, is that the movement, the rebellion, the uprising for George Floyd, that was led by Black radicals, and as part of the Black radical tradition of abolition that Nomi pointed to, when they burned down a police precinct, not only did riots spread across the country, similar anti-police riots, but so did mutual aid groups, so did strikes, so did blockades, so did all these questions. Everything started moving. Often direct action, abolition as a verb, as a thing that's happening in the present, instructs us on these connections in a way that I write and think and read, I think that stuff's important, but I think often we learn that stuff if we don't learn it from our lives, we can learn it from the example of the forms of resistance. And so I think it's no mistake that, in the wake of the burning down of the third precinct, we saw so many different movement tactics reemerge, remix, get tried all over the country. Maybe that's something.
I think for me, just, understanding the intersections of my identity, where, I come from Afro-Caribbean heritage.
Oh, you're muted, Nomi.
I'm so sorry, y'all. So I have a family who lives out in St. Croix, and, you know, so to hear these stories of, you know, how the land and how labor and how gender relations work when folks are living in an overt colonized land has always really informed to me, been able to help me see the many intersections of oppression that we're facing, and understand the need to really lean into the radical militancy and you know, truth-telling, freedom-fighting spirit of the resistance lineage that we come from. You know, we come from a lineage of resistors, fighters, of, you know, I tell people all the time, you know, the legacy of Harriet Tubman, you know, she stole herself to freedom every single day. She stole millions of folks to freedom. She looted, she lied to authorities. You know, these are the legacies that I really am able to grasp, like I said, the multiple connections, and understand, you know, where it is that we need to go and what the spirit is that we need to embody.
Yeah, I think on both the macro and micro levels, what happened this summer is a really good distillation of how all of these different threads can be intertwined. On like the macro level, like Vicky was talking about, in terms of just the like incredible diversity of actions that were taking place, in terms of like mutual aid efforts cropping up, direct actions, direct confrontations with police happening in the street, new bail funds cropping up, just a lot of different formations, like liberatory formations, sort of moving out of a moment that was rooted in police violence. And sort of it quickly revealed how many threads are tucked in to the sort of state force that it takes to kill George Floyd. And I think on the micro level, even just like looking around like the crowds that were in the streets this summer, you sort of saw that same diversity of tactics and diversity of motivations and movements represented on an embodied physical space, and you got to see how those different disparate elements could move together and stand in solidarity, you know, with each other in order to keep each other safe from police violence, and also to, you know, to cause ruckus, to cause to sort of, you know, heighten the tensions of the situation. And I think, yeah, I don't know, and that's sort of almost like, I guess, a quasi-abstract way of looking at it, but I think your question just made me think of how the interrelation of all of these different components of abolition can be understood by reading and writing, but can also be understood intuitively, like Nomi pointed to, by experience and by looking at sort of at what is already moving around us.
Thank you. So you touched on it a bit, Nomi, but I've always been very fascinated about how gender plays into the carceral system, and like how it always has since its conception, but also how, you know, gender has always been policed inside the home and outside the home, and I feel like I can't begin to understand the the prison and police systems without thinking about gender.
Yeah, I think, you know, colonialism places restrictions on how and why sexuality, the body, you know, expression can be used and for what reasons. And so I think that, you know, like you're saying, gender is, you know, such one of the most basic and earliest forms of policing that we're subject to, from, you know, whether it's when you're, you know, K through 12, having to say what you are. You know, folks have long hair, they want to know what you are, having to fill that out on like a survey. You know, people don't think of that as surveillance, but these are like the earliest forms of indoctrinating folks into a carceral system. And so, yeah, and then even going into the PIC, the prison industrial complex, we see that, you know, it replicates many forms of sexual violence, and it's so broad, the connections. I don't know if anybody else wants to hop in there. I think I said a lot.
No, that was great, and that like reminded me of something I was thinking when Matthew was talking. Sorry to hop back in. I know we've been, but you know, about how people say sort of, you know, oh, well, what about sort of sexual violence? You know, what do? You need prisons and police for that. And people don't talk about the way in which, like, obviously, like, prisons are the most concentrated sites of sexual violence in the world. I mean, maybe if you think about sort of distributed, the home in general, like that's the other place it really happens, right? It's in the family, but then it's also in prisons, right? Yeah, I just think like there's just it's really telling again that there are so many trans people in the street. Obviously, we are well overrepresented in these movements. We are well overrepresented in abolition because we have to be, because our lives depend on it often, especially if we're not lucky, like I mean not privileged like I am and in certain positions. But also like I think I think that there's just this real like push right now. They're trying to attack the movement with this weird they're attacking trans people as a way of trying to peel off sort of the movement, right? They're trying to split the movement by attacking at trans people. So there's all these trans laws, there's all this anti-queer, anti-transphobic stuff happening right now. And that is actually a way to like attack the uprising, I think, because it's pulling back at this really deeply, as a few people have alluded to, really deeply policed lines, these really policed boundaries in our homes and in our lives. And if they can reassert gender policing, then it is easier to reassert the legitimacy of police in general. So I think it's a really, really important and crucial moment.
This is Lydia. I'd add too that when people talk about, oh, we need police and prisons to deal with sexual violence, it isn't even just that we know that sexual violence happens constantly in carceral spaces, because that is part of the violence of them. But there's that underlying implication, right, of we want to keep the deserving white, cis-het, wealth-privileged, abled people safe from the perceived dangerousness and criminality, the presumed dangerousness and criminality of Black and brown and queer and trans and impoverished and disabled people, and that the people who are imprisoned deserve to be subjected to violence. That's the implication. That like we will protect society's deserving people, those who are privileged and resourced and powerful, by controlling, containing, and removing those who we already think of as undesirable, as less than human, and who deserve to be subjected to violence. Because when people think about it for even a second, right, they realize you don't go to prison alone if you're incarcerated. No one goes to prison alone if you're incarcerated. And just even the prevalence of prison rape jokes, as if that's supposed to be a funny thing in our culture, point to the acceptance of sexual violence occurring in prison because of that implicit presumption that if you're there, if you are incarcerated, you deserve to have violence done to you. And Jennifer, I know that you had a comment, and I think I accidentally jumped in. So Jennifer, I'll turn it to you.
Okay, I sit here, and when we talk about the whole gender and our carceral system and gender and the policing system, it's so confusing, but it's so messed up, and it's misogynistic, and we already know it's racist. And speaking for a Black trans woman who is formerly incarcerated, you have officers and other incarcerated people that have raped us, used us for money, used us as property. I'm already in a dehumanizing situation, and then this happens because you wanted to. I've met police officers who were on duty, and I'm walking, this is even before my incarceration, where you inserted your power to try to force me to do something. I don't think I understood the level of sexism, but as I got older and as I became the woman that I am, and even before I started transitioning, I've been put in spaces where I was made uncomfortable by officers before. And to sit here and just think of how many sex workers are raped and beaten by officers on the street, and then thrown in a prison or a jail cell because you were doing survival work. is crazy. And then I know that, as you just stated about the joke, I had lost my cool last year because it wasn't a joke, but it was implied that me as a Black trans woman inside of a male prison, oh, you must have had a good time. And what in your mind would make you think me or anyone who's incarcerated is having a good time? That's not the Poconos. That's not Cancun. That's not even the back porch. And it's sad, and there's people who think that oh, I've never heard that. No, we've seen some of our top comedians of multiple races tell prison jokes. And I don't want to use the exact language, but make it seem like, oh, okay, if a gay man or a trans woman ends up in a man's prison, they're like a kid in a candy store. If a lesbian ends up in a woman's prison, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We are that sick of a nation that this is what it is. Our United States structure is not even as big as some other countries. However, we got like, each state got like about damn 50 prisons and jails. Are you kidding me? And then while you're in there, there's nobody to protect you. You're already in a dehumanizing situation, like I said, and then to be in there and that to happen. And I fought for so many years for people to sit here and tell me, are you sure? Because I can't see that happening to you. Am I sure? It's something I don't understand, and I don't understand the levels in people's minds, but it bothers me, it hurts me more when higher ups, like wardens or administrators, when it comes to prisons and jails, when I reach out and nothing is done. I'm in New Jersey, and I didn't even know about PREA when I was raped. They kept that from me. I was raped, 24 hours later beaten. Nobody did nothing. You know, the first time I heard of PREA, like 3 years later, I'm already mentally and emotionally traumatized by what happened, and I was left to fend by myself while you cover that up. And to watch a cisgendered heterosexual young man say that his roommate, his cellmate, who was a lifer, made him to feel uncomfortable. I feel like he might rape me. That's the first time in the whole 5 years of me being incarcerated I ever heard of PREA, and I didn't even know what it was. It was until I got home and I didn't understand. So hold up, there was a whole organization and agency that you guys were supposed to give me the access to or have it around for me to see, for me to know to take my phone slot time and call for my own protection. You gotta be kidding me. And people think that this doesn't happen. It happens. So, okay, you take a bottle of milk, or what is the world supposed to be like without a prison and jail? It's supposed to be more unified. Who told you that as a cisgendered white male or any male or any person, period, is greater than the next? Me living my life is not bothering you, it's not hurting you, but you want to take my life or take my freedom and make me a 21st century slave. It's like I can't win just staying alive.
Thank you for sharing, Jennifer. And yeah, like, I mean, a central tenet of everything we do is to try and support incarcerated and formerly incarcerated folk. Like, there's not only so many troubles within prisons, but also just like the barriers that are put up affecting formerly incarcerated people, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Like, it's horrible and it's difficult, and I feel like we've talked a little bit about with the bail system, but I would love to hear about any of your organization's work that you do on that front.
Say the last part again. I'm sorry.
No problem. I just wanted to talk, we've talked a bit about abolition in the like theory ways, and I guess I wanted to chat a bit more about like how we directly support folks incarcerated or formerly incarcerated through our own like personal experiences and through like our organizations that we're repping.
Oh, go ahead, Jennifer. Go ahead, Jennifer. You do it. I mean, I was just gonna say, like, really quick. Letter writing, communication, noise demos. I do a lot of work that lets people know they're not forgotten. That just tries to communicate across the walls. Let them get voices out in many ways as well, so they can communicate not just through lawyers. And often, like, I know in Philly, like that's one thing that the bail fund, like one of the things it does is it's a line of communication in and out. And I know things have been, Jennifer was talking about how hard it is to access services, and it's gotten so much worse under COVID. The way that they've used COVID to just increase lockdowns, 23-hour, lockdowns. I know that's happening at the jail here in Philly, 23 hours a day. Like it's like everyone's almost in solitary just because of COVID. So, just trying to get some of that communication out. That's one thing that I and my comrades do.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, just speak on it from the bail fund's experience. One of the things that, we don't just like bail people out and then sort of step back. We also, like if the person doesn't have a community member to wait for them when they're released, we'll wait for them when they get out and then meet whatever immediate needs come up. And when we got like an influx of resources around the time of the uprising last summer, so we were able to actually start like materially supporting a lot of the people who we bailed out. And it basically gave us this perspective where we saw just like the massive number of people who are just being released from prisons or jails who need like right away help with housing most immediately and almost always, with addiction treatment like a ton of the time as well, and with just general mental health services. And what we do is we just give $300 cash to the people who we bail out so that they can spend it on like a hotel room or somewhere to go. But there's no, space or organization in the Richmond area that guarantees people, a long-term housing bed on short notice. And that doesn't condition that on some sort of, unattainable criteria. We carry Narcan with us so that anybody who is getting out has the ability to take Narcan for themselves or someone else in their community, because the number of overdose deaths in Chesterfield County, immediately south of Richmond, have skyrocketed during the pandemic. And we had a number of clients who experienced overdoses after we had bailed them out. And so we realized pretty urgently that there were these massive amount of needs, which is of course not news to I think anybody on this call, that people who are released from jail have, even after their term of incarceration ends. There is just such, and at the end of the day, of course, it shouldn't fall on sort of these ad hoc like grassroots organizations and formations to actually like fund and provide these services. But since it obviously is not in the state's prerogative to do that, it's seemingly at all anywhere, especially not in Virginia. It's just, there's a, if you're looking for a place to sort of a little lane to start getting involved with this work, a lot of, there's just a lot of need for a lot of different types of reentry services. And that is, another location within sort of the larger sphere of abolition work, where you're not only helping a ton of people with like direct material needs, but you're challenging the logics of incarceration, and you're actually helping, you're in a very good position to pursue like the political work of abolition and of base building for abolition as well. So there's a lot, just to shout out, No Left Turns in Richmond, Virginia is an organization that does really good, grassroots, like radically minded reentry work. But it's a super important space for people who are engaged with abolition work to be focused on and to be materially involved with.
This is Lydia. at the Autistic People of Color Fund, which is the short name for the very long name of the fund. There's a story behind that. It's a backronym for fuck racism. We couldn't figure out a K, but close enough. It's fine. The short version, we just call it the Autistic People of Color Fund. We give people money. We've given a lot of money to people to help people stay out of being reincarcerated, because courts will often impose onerous fines and fees on people who've been incarcerated, sometimes literally to pay for the cost of home incarceration. You have to pay a daily fee for the ankle bracelet. You have to pay fees to pay restitution for the cost of having been incarcerated. You have to pay money that you often don't have back because it was part of the conviction in court. And we give people money for basically anything that they might apply for. Anyone who is autistic and a person of color is eligible for funds from the Autistic People of Color Fund. We've had a number of people receive funds to assist with paying off bills that would otherwise be completely untenable and unaffordable, that come about as part of profiting off of mass criminalization and mass incarceration. We haven't actually received any requests for support from people on the inside, but we do have a paper application available. And I know that many of you are also working with other folks who are inside right now. If you know of any autistic people of color who are incarcerated, please feel free to put us in contact in whatever way would be easiest. And we would love to be able to extend that resource to be able to put money directly where people are if they're incarcerated now too.
Thank you, Lydia.
Okay, as I already stated, I have the Gen Love Project, and June 4th will be a year she's been officially up and running, and I have it housed within Black and Pink, which is the name that we usually call it, but it's for under the National LGBT HIV Criminal Justice Working Group. Within there, our biggest success story is our Pen Pal project. There's a great deal of staff and board members and chapter members who have been formerly incarcerated. And they always felt that the formerly incarcerated, the best way to know what's needed is to have the voices of formerly incarcerated people spearhead things. So we know that there's a great deal of people who don't have family, who don't have friends or any kind of connection when you're on the inside. And so we are here to be their voices, to connect them with legal services. They're to make sure, I'll fight for them to get their medical needs met at their facilities, get them sometimes transferred to a safer facility, because unless we can get them right out the door, then that's perfect. But sometimes we can't, and they may be requesting to go to another facility. But nevertheless, we have our card project, which is special holidays. Groups of peoples in different locations across the country all gather together, and we given a set amount of inside members, and we get them birthday cards and Christmas cards. Wow, not Christmas, holiday cards. And then we try to do as much pen pal matching as possible. And being that I'm specifically with the NYC chapter and Massachusetts, I do know that we also do solidarity packages twice a year to put some money on books of inside members, because it's hard. Like I said, there's a lot of people who don't have family and friends who's sending them money, let alone writing them. And I know, speaking for myself, that I know it was important for my family to keep money on my books. They don't have to drain their paychecks and stuff, but to give me a little bit of something. And then I knew that it was important for me to always receive mail. So doing that is like a blessing, but also noticing that coming home from prison, we there's a great deal of people that, well, another big part of incarceration period is reentry. And when it comes to reentry in Black and Pink, it's tailored to the locations where the chapters will be, or where National's headquarters is, because there's going to be needs that's going to be a little different. But Oh, by the way, you can donate to the Gen Love Project. Anyone that's listening, if you can read my shirt, genloveproject.org. And you could be abrupted of all my future endeavors when it comes to expanding the Gen Love Project. My ultimate goal is to have that be across over 50 states. Right now, it's coined as me servicing only New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. However, if you have any inside member, any incarcerated person, and you can have them write me at the NYC chapters PO box, which is any you guys can Google and send out to them. They can always reach me there, and I will get a form to them so I can know what sizes and stuff to send out to them. I just went all over the board real fast, but nevertheless, we have a new initiative that Black and Pink has started. Is not off the ground 100%, I don't think, but it's to help some of our members coming home to try to get them some housing for like at least for a month or so, because any day or so not being on the street is a blessing, and people don't get it. Your incarceration, once you are incarcerated, it doesn't end when you walk out the door. They send you out the door with an ID card that says like 60 or 30 days, this is your ID. No, you go around showing that ID card, guess what? All that says is I'm a convicted felon and I just got home, and everybody's got to clutch their pearls and clutch their purse. No. That's a setup. So it's for us, and we had chapters to sit there, take everybody to get their first big meal, get some toiletries and everything else more than a Gen Love package will offer. And get them to have us accompany them to the paroles, help them get the paroles, and help them find the proper medical facilities that's going to be formerly incarcerated friendly, LGBTQ plus friendly, and HIV friendly. You know, and FYI, if there are any medical providers watching, understand you can have an amazing nurse and nurses aides and doctors and practitioners. Don't mind me if I called everybody by a different kind of name, but you know what I'm talking about. Understand your amazing healthcare starts at the moment me or anyone walks in your door. So if you have racist or homophobic or transphobic or I don't know what you call it, but like Islamophobic, when you have an issue with Muslims and stuff, your security guards at the front door who check us coming in, they need to be as PC and as respectful as possible. Mental health is a big thing. No one should ever feel uncomfortable to speak up and say, I'm broken. I'm losing it. I can't stop crying. We have to make this a normal thing, because it is a normal thing. And it is okay to seek help, and we have to provide that help for them. So that's what we're doing right now. I went all over the place. We want to make your re-entry back into the world as smooth as possible. No one can meet every single need, but we have no problem. I have no problem partnering with any agency, any group of people, because my ultimate goal is to have all of their needs met. And I know that I was blessed to have my family and a home to come to, money on the books to come home, money that was given to me when I got home to get on my feet. And I know a lot of my sisters and brothers do not have that. I want everybody to have that, because that's basic human right.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, like, Jennifer, like what you were saying was so, I mean, I'm just sitting here nodding, like I'm gonna get a crick in my neck, like from everybody, y'all. It's so beautiful what everyone's saying. I'm so honored to be joining y'all. But like when people talk about unhoused folks, because that's a lot of the work I do now, people tend to think of that as, oh, it's pretty chaotic. They're pretty sort of on their own. And like, that's a real misconception. There is intense surveillance on unhoused people. If you stay in a shelter, you have to be in at a certain hour. They're searching you, like, when you come in and out. People get kicked out of housing. We actually lost a comrade, actually passed away on the street recently because he got kicked out of his house because he had an unlit joint in his pocket. He had an unlit joint, so then he got kicked out of a halfway house for a joint, right? Could you imagine if the white folks in the nearby neighborhoods got searched every time they tried to come into their home? I think we think about, when we think about abolition and these processes, I think we tend to think of the worst scenarios, which is the police violence and the prisons. Those are obviously the most horrible scenarios. But as Jennifer is saying, people come out of these prisons and they just hit the street, and the street is not like, if they want any services at all, mental health services of any kind, they have to submit to so much surveillance. You know, you have to say like, oh, you like a lot of these programs are designed for like, this one's for people in recovery. This one's for women with children. This one's for, you know, for people from broken homes. And like, you have to prove that you're from one of those categories in order to even access the services. Like the levels of surveillance and policing that go on when you're at the bottom of society, like I think like people who are comfortable like assume that that's not happening and assume that it's chaotic, when in fact it's way more controlled. And another thing you're making me think of, Jennifer, and then I'll give out the mic, like was, you know, during the Underground Railroad, like during the abolition movement, you know, the first abolition movement as we recognize it in the 19th century, one of the main practices that happened was people in cities, Black people, often freed ex-enslaved people themselves, would hang out at docks and at stations and where people arrived, and they would just look for people looking lost and confused, right? People who looked maybe unhoused, people who looked like they didn't know where they were from, and they would approach them and they'd say, oh, have you just escaped from the South, you know? A lot of this sort of informal organizing, it's invisible. It's not talked about that way. It happens in the social. It's like Jennifer's talking about, it's happening in healthcare, it's happening in housing, it's happening in all these different spaces. And just bring back sort of how it's all connected. I think that's so important, and the way that work all intersects with, you know, with, as Nomi was saying, this tradition of resistance, of cultures of resistance, I think it can't be forgotten and can't be overstated, frankly.
Yes, and to circle back to the original question, ways that I'm actualizing abolition over here. I do a lot of work supporting new African incarcerated people, incarcerated African and Black folks, sharing political education, mutually sharing political education, learning from each other. And then also Race Capital, the podcast and radio show that I co-host, is really become central to that work. We challenge racial narratives as put forth by the corporate media, and that's been really useful for those on the inside to gain insight into what is truly happening, because they know that we are not beholden to any corporate interests. We're not beholden to any electoral powers. So that's been a really beneficial way to just, you know, create a sense of trust, and also, again, have a reliable stream of information about what's happening on the inside and what's happening on the outside, and making sure that folks in the community know as well. So that's just one of many ways that I am working abolition in. Also, I would just like to add, I like to center a lot of my education from folks who are who have the most experience with facing a lot of these intersections of state violence, right? It's been through really listening to elders, to most vulnerable parts of our communities, that I've learned so much of what it means to be an abolitionist, and what it means to really root yourself in community care. So that is definitely something that I hold central to my study in evolution as an abolitionist.
Yeah, I think just to put a final coda on my thoughts on this, Nomi, I really love that, and it made me think about how, when it relates to reentry, such a valuable component of reentry is, you know, actually, and an imperative for abolitionist organizers as well, is to actually organize with and alongside formerly incarcerated people. And it was formerly incarcerated, same thing, like sort of formerly incarcerated elders and mentors specifically. It was Corey Green at Incarceration to Education Coalition at NYU that sort of taught me sort of the basics of abolitionist organizing and what living an abolitionist commitment looks like. And so when we think about reentry work, a lot of it is, and the core of it, you know, is and should be resource provision, making sure that people can live and can thrive. But another like really, really generative component of it is actually getting to work alongside and work in ways that center the experiences of the people who are getting the reentry support. Like, it's not just a resource provision relationship, you know, that's one way. It needs to be sort of much more robust and much more mutual. And if it's not, that is just a waste of potential and a waste of resources.
Yeah. And again, like, just to be the history nerd I always am, like that, like, you know, we think about the Underground Railroad as like a bunch of nice Quakers, right? Like, who were like, you know, like they had an extra room in their house or whatever. White people, right? They were white people. The vast, vast, vast majority of the abolitionist movement in the 19th century was formerly enslaved folks who had freed themselves or who were, you know, a few generationally freed. Like, that is going to be the same here now in the present. The abolition movement is going to come out of the people who have been, you know, they're going to lead it, and they already do, and they already are.
Thank you, everyone. And I mean, you've already touched us about on the importance of mutual in what we're talking about and how this is a collaboration with each other, what we are trying to do. And I guess I just want to talk about that. As a child, I was always told if I wanted to change anything, you have to go through NGOs. And yet lately, I've just really seen the power of mutual aid, of collectives born together by people who are angry and say, you know, we want something different. And I guess that's just something that's really been on my mind. It's like, why do we not really hear about how the models such as like the Gen Love Project or even like the Richmond Bail Fund are using? Like, why is this? I hope that makes sense. That feels more like a statement than a question.
I think I understood you. In my mind, and it's not just because you named the Gen Love Project. In my mind, I think that I or my nonprofit serves what they want it to serve. If I guess this goes back to when I started talking the first time, that there are organizations who I see giving grant after grant after grant, and I'm not judging and I'm not saying them names. But when you go to ask these people from this area where this foundation is at, if it could be about HIV housing, how come there's a whole community over here with a whole medical center over here with caseworkers and nobody knows that you exist, but you're getting all these grants? Okay, you got this person over here who's supposed to be helping people coming home with reentry. Didn't you just get a grant for a house? I seen y'all go to Aruba, but where's the house at? I got some people that's just coming home and I want to be able to refer them to you. Oh, but y'all getting all the grants. So in when you look at a lot of these big funders, they in their minds, oh, we did what we're supposed to do for y'all community. We gave 10,000 here, 20,000 there. Yeah, and you gave it to them several years in a row. However, what have they done? Because I know I'm not giving you all this money and not seeing the work done. However, you see me in my little small situation, or any of you guys with your smaller organizations as well. Okay, why am I fighting tooth and nail as a grassroots situation who I'm literally here doing the work? I'm not doing the work because it's the end thing, because a lot of organizations, regardless of what the cause is, everybody's seeing it as, oh, it's fame and money. And I just, and then the people who are sitting here literally taking from their own plates to make this happen did nothing. Because when the Gen Love Project started, I didn't have shit. All I had was things that I gathered and bought on my own, out of my own pocket. I'm on Social Security, but I made that happen as much as I could. However, that's just me, in my opinion. It was a hard pill to swallow and not throw it back up, because I never want to seem like I'm downing anyone else. But it is what it is. There's a lot of people out here supposed to be doing work for the community. Our community is in need. Our community is under damn fire. Our community is being policed. Our community is being killed. Yet, everybody wants to be abolitionists and activists and have this and have that. Where is the work? Granted, the work doesn't have to be shown to me or to the public, but I should be able to send one of my clients to you. And I can't because I don't know where you are. The hospitals, the case managers, nobody knows where you are. But yeah.
Yeah, what I'll say about nonprofits is that I think revolutionary things might be able to happen with them. People might be able to utilize them for a revolutionary purpose, but the revolution is not going to take place in no 501c3. It's not, you know, it's going to happen by funding and supporting autonomous community-led projects. This is like, you know, people like to think of abolition like theorizing the struggles. It's like a way for neoliberalism likes to like co-opt how we should, you know, fight for the revolution. But like these theories and practices are happening in the community. People are building systems of care. People are not calling the police. People are, you know, figuring out ways to support their communities and hold folks in love and compassion. And so, and they're doing it with the same $20, right? Like our communities are doing these things with the same $20 to $40 every single day, and have been doing it not just over this past year, but for generations, especially queer and trans folks. You know, these are the people, we are the community that knows what it means the most to keep each other safe, as we often say. So yeah, I think when it comes to nonprofits, that's just like a tool of the state to try to calm and take control of a resistance that is rising. But as long as folks know, you know, I know our folks are often funneled into those sectors, and I know that people got to eat, but I think that if you're not, as is often said, trying to work yourself out of a job and trying to work your organization out of existence, you're really not doing the revolutionary work that you think you're doing.
This is Lydia. I always say that when people ask me, what do you want to do in 20 years from now? What would your dream career be? And I'm like, well, if the work that I'm doing leads to the outcome that I would like, or, you know, contributes to the outcome that I would like, which is liberation, then the work that I'm doing, most of that work wouldn't exist. It literally wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be a purpose for it. But on that question of how nonprofits can co-opt movement work, and they do all the time, I'll just put this out there. The Autistic People of Color Fund has applied for years and years for different grants from organizations that claim to be about supporting revolutionary liberatory work. Guess how much money we've received from such grant applications? $0. The vast majority of the donations that come to the Autistic People of Color Fund actually come from directly impacted, multiply marginalized community members, which means a lot, right? Because if somebody who is making $7 an hour makes a $100 donation somewhere, that's as much significantly higher proportion of that person's income than someone who's like some kind of millionaire somewhere saying, oh yes, I'll donate $1,000 somewhere, which they generally aren't doing to organizations or projects like any of ours. They're generally not there. Maybe once in a blue moon. But generally the people who actually fund the work are the people who need the work, are the people who are doing the work. And in so many community spaces I've heard from community members, comrades, from elders, we're passing the same $20 around. We're passing the same $100 around. We just pass it around to each other. Whenever someone has it, they get it. And, you know, that's where the work is. And we don't see this and we don't talk about this a lot, right? But in all of our communities, we have a term for it. In the disabled community, we call it the CRIP tax of what it costs to live in the world as disabled and how we support each other. I've heard some of my Black community members and comrades call it the Black tax in Black community spaces. And it means the ways in which when any of us comes into any amount of money, because we get a salary job, because we get a grant, because we get access to, even if it's temporary and precarious, some kind of position, some kind of money, we immediately begin dividing and redistributing that money to our family members, to our neighbors, to our communities, because we understand the power of shared collective responsibility in redistributing resources and in being able to support each other's survival and in being able to sustain the work and sustain each other to do the work that we need to get done. And people who come from resourced, powerful organizations who've not thought about the privilege that they hold, they deal in the world of philanthropy and the world of charity. And we're dealing in the world of collective struggle.
a good rule of thumb I've always lived by is the more money a nonprofit has and the higher the salaries they're paying, the less work they're doing. You know, it's just like, it's always the case. I think you all have seen it. And I think at this point, so many of us have seen it, that, you know, there's these big organizations that pull in all these grants, get all this attention and do fuck all with it. Right. And like, excuse me, and do nothing with it. And get famous. And I think like that.
My ring says fuck, so you know you should.
Okay, good. Yeah, I did pretty well. We made it an hour 10 minutes before I dropped an F-bomb, so it was pretty good. But yeah, I think like basically like that, and that is really because, as someone I think in the chat was saying in a comment, is a nonprofit industrial complex. It is part of the way that capital has restructured. As Nomi was pointing to, under neoliberalism, as a reaction to the movement of the 60s. They tried to cut the legs out from things like the Black Panther Party breakfast program. They tried to develop these forms, these nonprofit forms that would take this movement energy and would put it back into, you know, supporting people. You know, people have to eat, but like keeping people employed in a capitalist way, you know. And now it's been 50 years. All these nonprofits have been around for 50 years. The problem they solve have only gotten worse, right? What's going on is that they maintain the problems. These nonprofits are designed to keep the problems survivable for their clients, but never to solve them. And like, until we like start to really like just do like recognize that the state and the nonprofits want things to stay this way, no matter how nice that lady is, that CEO is, or whatever, or like the caseworker, and some of these people really came into it for the right reasons, right? Like you got to understand that, like, and it's complicated. It's a contradiction or whatever, but yeah. They are part of keeping the system the way it is. Very often, activist orgs have to do nonprofit in order to be able to accept any money at all. So that's obviously, you know, a complicating factor. But yeah, the more money they have, the more they're just actually a capitalist organization, I think, in general.
Yeah, and I think this has sort of been said a lot indirectly, but just to put a specific point on it, like a lot of the answer to your question is like, why is this the case? It's reducible to like the foundations that fund the nonprofits. It's like 2 or 3 fund, like, you know, most of the nonprofits in the country. 4 foundations, Soros Foundation, you know, a couple others formerly known as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But it's, yeah, exactly. And it's like, I mean, it's follow the money. It's an old idea, but it's the types of organizations that have these massive amounts of resources. Like what they're allowed to do is constrained by the foundation they're getting the grant from. And the grant, you know, if it's run by an oligarch or a billionaire, you can probably guess what sort of limits or what boundaries are going to put on the work that their funding does. And that's for the why. I think another point that I'm glad you raised this, Chidi, because it's something that, and I know other folks, you know, on this chat love to talk about this too, and have taught me a lot about it. But there have been calls there have been these sort of undifferentiated calls to organize sort of in the wake of the uprising and in the wake of this moment of awareness around like the necessity of abolition or ending capitalism or sort of various different radical goals. And like, that's like definitely not something I disagree with. But it's about organizing in a specific way. Because like we've been talking about, there's lots of organizations that, like, frankly, I don't think you should join, you know, or give money to. And so it's not just this uncritical idea of organizing as an end unto itself. It's organizing in a particular way for a particular goal. And it's really less about organization than it is about movement and disruption. And there are plenty of organizations out there. Again, we could all name names, but won't. That like, if you join them, they will actually decrease your capacity for movement. They actually sort of stultify movement and stifle it in a lot of ways. And just being mindful of that when we're talking about the need to organize in response to all of these looming social crises. Yes, organization is good, but remember, movement is what is important. And there are plenty of organizations that if you join them, you might be actively contributing to the problem. So I think that's sort of been a subtext to this conversation that I just wanted to be sure everybody listening is clear on. Don't join the ACLU. Okay, I'll mute myself.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like as tied to this, I mean, I love bringing up the idea of, it's just the same $20 passed back and forth. I feel like there's a lot of queer and anarchist frameworks that we really do approach in our work here. And that's just very different to sometimes what is allowed within some of these bigger nonprofits. And I guess I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about these ways of organizing we have rediscovered and very much like mixed and matched a lot in the last few years. And like, what kind of movements are necessary to get us to the place where we are imagining where we want to go? Like, I would love to, I find it hard when we talk about abolition, like, yes, it's very important to like stay grounded in the way that we can change our present, but I also just love looking at that horizon, and I would love to have a little chat about that with all y'all.
I'd love to see the return of mass marronage. I'd love to see some prison and jail breaks as a next step.
Nice.
This is Lydia. We talk all the time in disabled community about like, what would it look like for us to help get our people out, including in ways that like obviously are not legally sanctioned, without, talking about what that looks like. But it's, something that we think about and we dream about. It's like, what does it look like for us to get our people out, to get our people free?
And to stop them from going into jail. What does it look like on that front of the Underground Railroad in a modern context?
Yes.
What does it look like to liberate stolen money that's just housed in corporations and banks? The same people that are evicting our folks. Like, what does it look like to live in abolition as it was? I think like too often people disconnect the two, as we've been talking about. But if we understand that abolition has been a constant, we'd say movement like the ocean. It's been a constant, steady flow. It's just been weaker or stronger at certain points in history, but it's never gone, it's never gone away. It's always been present. So like, what does it look like to embody the movement as it began currently?
And this is Lydia. And what does it look like to disappear all of these spaces of incarceration? And I don't think enough folks are talking about this, and we need to be. More and more of us need to be talking about how incarceration shows up in so many types of institutions and sites of control. And we don't talk about the fact that prisons and jails and psych hospitals and disability institutions and nursing homes are all part of the same systems that deliberately and specifically target for control, for erasure, for disappearance, people who are at the margins of the margins. And when we talk about disappearing places of incarceration, that means all forms of incarceration.
Yeah, I think too often the term police state is kind of like generalized or like mysticized. It's like, no, we actually mean that every state institution operates as a carceral system, like each and every single one. We can go through a list from the way that we treat children, from the way that we treat the land, like, so many different systems of incarceration is what we're talking about when we refer to the police state, not just the prisons, not just the policemen.
The family regulation system, the education system, the healthcare system, let alone the mental health care system.
Yes.
All of it.
One thing I can talk about, because we went public with it. One thing that we were doing over the summer and for the year before here is we were squatting PHA owned homes that were owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority, which is a federally funded sort of gentrification machine that gets funds from HUD to support people, and that just basically sits on empty houses and then sells them off to developers. We squatted a bunch of those, we filled them with people, and then as the movement hit the streets in Philadelphia, we opened some encampments. I say we, but I'm not trying to claim any credit for this. This is all largely about unhoused folks and formerly incarcerated folks. And like that, and then because there was a political struggle, we were able to go public with it, and we have now kept all those squats, and we've gotten 50 more. So this stuff is like, obviously like that's a very, very small number, but you can move quietly, you can move in ways that we wouldn't want to talk about here. And eventually, in the context of bigger movements of anti-police rioting, of other things going on, you can then bring those into the present, and you can use this abolitionist moment to collapse all these sites of oppression and yeah, and I think that's all I'll say without getting any further into it.
I think I just saw a good notion. I was in the chat. I think it came up. And I was thinking that I was just gonna wait, and then that popped up, and so like yeah, in my mind, I know that I never knew that like that prisons and jails is like $1 billion, probably if not more, industry, and all of these things that's technically strongly policed situations. These are like big budget situations, and I'm pretty sure if you strip them of that, when we say like defund or reallocate money from police, yeah, defund and reallocate the money for their asses too. And put it to those communities that are policed. Trust and believe. If they ain't getting it like 33,000, what is it? Like New Jersey is like 33,000 per body. And that's sad. And to hear it told to me, broken down to me like that, yeah, that's sad. So if we take that 33,000, you could take that 33,000 and put it to that family, and they can go a lot better. And you won't have to try to go grab the community up. If you invested that money into the community, so many people can stay here and flourish. Because these communities are underfunded. They don't receive the health care that they need in any form, but yet they fill the prisons up, and you don't give the money to those communities or those groups. However, you're sure to snatch them up and put them in the prison and get $1 off of them.
Yeah. Yes. And like, I think a lot of people like to talk on the left. A lot of people like to talk about how there isn't a social safety net in America. And I think actually an abolitionist way of thinking about it that's really helpful is there is a social safety net in America. It's prisons. It sucks. It's really, really horrible. But it's cheaper than feeding and housing everyone. It's a little cheaper than feeding and housing everyone who needs it now. You let everyone struggle on the street outside, and then you catch a lot of people and you put them in prisons and you feed them and you keep them, alive after a fashion. It's horrible. It's horrible. But I think we have to like really start thinking about like when we talk about social safety nets or like, these sort of like these ways where the state is going to come in or NGOs are going to come in and help us. Like they're already doing it. They're already coming in and helping us. This is what them coming in and helping us looks like. We keep us safe. We have to help each other because we know what real help looks like. And this is how they help us. And it's not working, and it hasn't been working for 500 years now. And it's time for a change.
Yeah, and I think just to circle back, Chidi, to your question about sort of what the horizons of abolition are, how to think about the horizons of abolition, like if that's even kind of a useful framework for abolition. I think one of this idea, I'm totally cribbing from Mariame Kaba's new book, We Do This Till We Free Us, but it's been circulated in a lot of abolitionist texts and by a lot of abolitionist thinkers, which is that the world that we're moving toward, like a world where policing and prisons not only don't exist, but aren't even sensible options for people, and that we respond to harm and violence in non-carceral ways, is a world that while we can draw on traditions and personal experiences to help imagine that world, as people living where we're living, it's not a world that we have seen with our own eyes, and not being freaked out by that. I think it's important not to be freaked out by that, and to not, abolitionists shouldn't feel like you have to be accountable for describing, every textural detail of a world, without policing and prisons. And the framework that Mariame Kaba used that I think is so helpful is that requires sort of a faith in collective wisdom, right? We sort of know the direction that we're moving in as abolitionists. And we know, and we can, again, because of these traditions and the work that ancestors and elders have done, we can, we can help sketch the world that we're moving to. We sort of know the general map, but it's going to require us figuring things out as we go along, and we have to trust ourselves to do that, to actually do that figuring out in the moment, and to not have sort of this one set model of organizing and of progress and of abolition that we must adhere to in order to reach, this world that we're imagining and talking about. But recognizing that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know from where we're standing right now, and that is okay, and that we will figure those things out as we continue to move closer, has been very, very grounding just for me thinking about how I do the work, and also having conversations about, abolition and what it means with people who are new to the ideas, naming that it's okay. A little bit of uncertainty does not discredit, the movement of abolition, and really kind of taking that seriously and considering it within the work that we do, I think is vital.
Well,
Yes, I really.
Go, Nomi, go.
No, I was just saying I really vibe with that as somebody who is rooted in the Black radical tradition, identifies as anarchata. Something that Afrofuturism really touches on, and Rastafarianism, is to recognize that we live in between a material world and an immaterial world, from what we've lost and what is here, and then what we're hoping to create. And always reading ourselves and the struggle in that gap between like what we want to build, what there was, and what we hope to be obsolete. And that can be really hard, like to navigate all those different spaces. But I think that it is really grounding to just look at yourself as what the Rastafarians refer to as trotting from past Africa to the future Africa. And I really hold that close to my heart in the way that I think about abolition, which is why I like to not think of it as something that happened in the 19th century necessarily. I just like to think of myself holding hands with ancestors who are comrades, because we're all connected in a long struggle. So that's kind of how I look at the horizons. Try to really lean into being a visionary and not limit my sight as far as the way that I'm thinking about abolition.
I have to say that abolition gives me so much hope for just imagining a better, fairer future. And it's been so heartwarming listening to everyone here talk about their experiences with abolition and sharing their wisdom. And I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for this. Thank you. And before we wrap up, I want to reintroduce Greg from the Bureau from at the beginning to wrap us up.
Yay. Thank you, everyone, so much for sharing. We really appreciate this. The work that you do is so important, and I hope that everyone gets more involved if they're not involved already. There's plenty to do. I also wanted to remind people that on the Bureau's store, we have our website, bgsqd.com. There you go, /store. If you go there, you'll see a section for Reclaim Pride Coalition Recommends. And there are a bunch of books that are about this, specifically in connection with this panel. Vicky has a book. There are several others. So please check that out. There's a lot of great resources there. And then I also want to remind you that in 2 weeks, we are going to be having our next panel, the fourth in the series, and that's on Radical Black Love. That will be on Friday, May 21st at 6 p.m. So we'll be putting out news about that real soon, about the details, but I'm really looking forward to that. And then our final panel, we don't have a date for yet. It's going to be in June, will be on sex work and sex workers' rights. So please stay tuned and join us. And I want to remind everyone that if you know someone who would benefit from this panel and would be interested in it, it will live on Facebook and our YouTube channel, so you can share that with them afterwards. And I think that's it. So once again, big love to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And we want to keep supporting you and joining with you in all the work that you're doing. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a lovely night, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right, everybody. Well done.
We did it.
You did.
Oh yeah, it was cat free.
It's still alive.
Oh, hey,
Oh,
baby.
wait, I've got.
You were the bestest, cutest cat. All cats. That is science.
You slept the whole panel blissfully.
Are we still recording?
No, we aren't recording anymore.
We got
No.
a cat over here too. Yep.
Live up
It
there.
says live.
Yeah, because